fact, we also gave one called the Rather for a lifetime. This year we gave New York. We gave the first Granny Prize to this guy David Kirkpatrick in the New York Times, who told massive amounts of lies about Benghazi, and then it was all exposed 3 days later. But there was obviously a government leak that they wanted to put out there. And then we also gave it to Candy Crowley, who interrupted Romney during the debates to assure us that Obama had definitely called it a terror attack, whereas everybody with IQ in triple digits knew he didn't. That was probably the greatest, I think, public intervention by a journalist I've ever seen. It maybe changed our history negatively. And then the Rather Lifetime Award went to Seymour Hersh. The reason we call it the Rather, I don't know if any of you know, the pajamas media got its name because of Dan Rather. That was, if you think back to those great, glorious days, I guess, when Bush was running, and Rather said on TV, on 60 Minutes, that he had papers on Bush's National Guard service, and some bloggers said, no, those aren't real papers, those are forgeries. In fact, they were made with Microsoft Word that didn't even exist. And we proved it. But in that particular, and Rather to this day denies it. But he lost his job. But during that period, a man named Klein called all of us, who was the executive producer of 60 Minutes at that point, called all of us amateurs in our pajamas. So then we said, okay, pajamas media. So that's how we got his name. I mean, I can continue forever on one of these guys, but if you go on, we can
listen forever.
What?
We can listen forever.
Well, all right, let me tell you one thing I did at the Washington. I gave a big talk that lasted for hours at Washington State Republican, and they were very interested in how my political change came about. Because political change is like, I think we should all be watching it because we can sort of nudge people if we do it very carefully. It's really hard, but anyway, my political change probably came a lot, surprisingly to me, because of the OJ trial. I had been, I was a civil rights worker in the 60s. And I was very heavily involved in the civil rights movement, actually, in some ways negatively, because I made money in Hollywood when I was a very young guy. I was guilty about it, making so much money so quickly. So I gave sums to the Black Panther Party, who used it for their breakfast program. I don't know if you remember that they used to have this thing. They had in LA and San Francisco this breakfast program with it. And they would come to my house, hey Roger, and I'd write them a check at 10 o'clock at night with these kids. But I was always wondering, whether they were using it for scrambled eggs or AK-47s. And, I think it was maybe a little of each. And they weren't very good guys. Anyway, I mean, as you know, so I met them all. But by the time the OJ trial rolled around, I was sort of shocked at what was going on because I was a civil rights worker and this was like reverse racism was happening. I was kind of naive because, reverse racism from white to black and white always happens because people are just people. There are lots of awful people in the world, there always will be some awful people in the world, unless some miracle occurs. What happened was, the OJ trial tried to disturb me, and I went down to the trial. Everybody in LA at that point was like, the trial took over the city. I mean, in a way that you can't even imagine. And it changed media as we know it. I mean, all these people who appear on TV now, like Greta Van Susteren, I mean, they're products of the OJ trial.
Yes.
And the whole idea of there being media trucks was a a kind of development of the OJ trial, if you would, because you've never seen it before. You see one little media truck someplace. And the OJ trial occurred in downtown Los Angeles. There were like 50 media trucks in a row. I mean, it was an unbelievable sight because this was such a world phenomenon. But you're watching this thing where a guy who seemed to me obviously dead on guilty was being, let off. I was depressed about it. That was all. I mean, but it sort of made me revise my thinking about the world in a certain way. I mean, that I wasn't just knee-jerk about it. And then on the day that the planes flew into the World Trade Center, I was watching it on TV. I think I never turned around. I never went back. I just sort of like became a patriot for the first time in my life. And I really believe in this country, and I want to fight for it. With my pen, because I'm a little old to do it otherwise. But or my computer. That's where. And then, once you open one, because my first changes were all about foreign policy. But then the door opened, and I started to study economics. I'd gone to Ivy School, but I never studied economics, really. I mean, I came from that generation that read the Communist Manifesto before they read the Constitution. I don't mean that literally, but figuratively. I mean, of course I read the Constitution so I could get a good grade in American history. But I read the Communist Manifesto like it was good form novel for 11th grader. I mean, I read it, late at night, like, wow, that's fascinating for me to
listen to Radio Moscow.
And it was like, I think I'm very typical of my generation that way. Very typical. And it took me until I was like 60 years old before I started to realize there was great people to read like Hayek. And I started reading Hayek and Mises, and I started to realize that, wait a minute, freedom is what it's about. That's the only hope for anybody. Well, but it took, I was very late to the party, very, very late. And I'm almost embarrassed to say so. But the fact that I'm late to the party gives me hope that other people could arrive late too. I mean, that's all I can say. I mean, there might be some. And then you have to, I'm a very argumentative person, so I have to resist the temptation to argue people and try to defeat them in argument, because I don't think that helps you change them. I think we all have to sort of get there in a dopey way. And there are certain things that I've never changed on, like I'm totally pro-gay marriage. And I've always been pro-gay marriage, and I don't know if I'll ever change, but I don't think so. It's fine with me, just have a good lawyer. And I realize saying this in a synagogue is part of this conservative synagogue, is not part of the tradition. But that's my view on that issue. So in social issues, I think the secret, by the way, I think one of the secrets for the right to win is to take the social issues off the table and say, hey, those things should be dealt with in places like this. That's the province of the private life, not the government. Government, everybody. Synagogues, other similar organizations can go deal with abortion, gay marriage, all those private issues. And rabbi can counsel people, and psychiatrists can counsel people. People can counsel themselves, but not the government.
And synagogues can't pass laws.
What?
Synagogues can't pass laws to make it legal.
What's that?
What? Synagogues cannot pass laws to make gay marriage or abortion
Of course
legal.
not.
So the government still has to be involved in that.
No, I mean, I take a libertarian stance with all that, which is the government should not be in marriage at all. Period.
Yes.
That that the government gives civil unions to consenting adults of a certain age, blah, 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 that's it. And then you all are elected to determine who's a husband or wife, and you can join organizations that ratify that, have friends that do it, have parties, government. I've read it now, there's only one area where I'm very pro-government, the common defense.
Yes.
Military.
Yes.
That's where those guys back then knew a lot. They knew a lot. Yeah?
I just have one question. What's got 4 legs and chases cats? The answer? Mrs. Katz and her attorney. Sorry. No, but I get seriously, folks. No, you know, I think 9/11 did it for me too. A few years after Pearl Harbor, Hollywood organized and united and produced dozens of films. Sands of Iwo Jima, Back to Bataan, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, The House on 92nd. You can just go through the full skein of them. In the aftermath of 9/11, where 3,000 civilians were killed, Hollywood responded by producing, as far as I can tell, basically 2 films. One was United 93 by Paul Greengrass, and the other was the recent Zero Dark 30. And Frank Rich of the New York Times trashed United 93.
Frank Rich.
So,
you know what I was going to talk about, that very thing, because I went off on another tilt, as I often do when I speak, but I wanted to start with one thing, and I'll say that as it relates to this. It's my fault. What I mean is my fault is this, because this is how I'm starting this book. My generation, those same guys and gals who were reading the Communist Manifesto at night and going wild in the Golden Gate Park,
yeah.
they're the ones running out. And the sad tragedy of that is that it's all about the generation of 1968, right?
Right.
All of whom are like older than the boomers, really. I'm not a boomer. I was born in 1943.
Yeah.
The boomers were imitating us. Abby Hoffman was born in 1936.
Yeah.
Timothy Leary was born in the 1920s. So it's our fault. They all those Clinton-esque nitwits came along imitating us.
Mm-hmm.
They were imitating us.
Right.
So we are to blame. And we're the ones who, and they're all running, and we're all running Hollywood. And Hollywood, instead of uniting people like it did after Pearl Harbor, it might as well have been run by Bin Laden.
Yeah. I mean, the left understood early on that art was to be employed in the revolution. The right never really had an ideology. The right was basically let's live and use common sense. The left understood it perfectly. So when is the right going to be able to figure this out?
I'm trying. I mean, that's the story of my life, because I'm trying to do that. I mean, you have to do, I can tell you some of the things we're working on, but I mean, some of it is confidential simply because it's, you don't want to, well, I'll give you a hint. We're working on trying to do a sitcom set at the UN. Please do me a favor. Don't go out of this room. Because if we pull this off, you can, the laughter tells me you get it.
A comment on a question. It's interesting you went to Dartmouth. I spent my junior year there, and we all worked for McGovern. And the rest of the time there was a lot of arts at Dartmouth, but very little politics. But my question is, did you happen to read the Ted Cruz op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today about free speech?
No, I didn't get up early enough to read the Wall Street Journal.
The crux of it is that Democrats want to overturn Citizens United, which I think is a good idea. However, what they're going to do as a byproduct of it is threaten free speech to everyone. And he makes a comment in the column that, well, gee, the New York Times is a corporation, Paramount is a corporation. the networks are corporations. Well, we're not talking about their free speech. We're just talking about everybody else's free speech. And then he gives about 7 examples that could hurt the right and the left on limiting our free speech. And that, you know, this has never been done in the history of the Republic. So I think the idea of it is pretty scary because it's really unintended consequences. And I don't think I agree with Ted Cruz about anything, but when I read his column, I said, geez, this is really something to think about. And there's something like 47 Democrats that have signed on to this proposed amendment.
41.
I didn't, or 41?
Well, I'll tell you something, I had the same, I was a little suspicious of Ted Cruz myself. But then I was invited to this dinner, a Churchill dinner, given by this think tank in LA, and it was pretty good. I mean, he's a very good speaker. He's super smart. I think he has other problems, you know, but he's not to be dismissed either.
If you drive through Hollywood at Christmas, you see tons of houses with lights on them, and almost every one of them is owned by a Jew. And you know, it's kind of the culture of Hollywood. You was, you know, you were talking about earlier. You got to change the culture. You got to change the business, the person at the top of whatever studio it is. And don't you think that they don't have enough balls to be able to come out and say, hey, I really think this way. They want to go along. They want to be able to get Sean Penn in their movie. They want to be able to get, you know, any liberal actor or actress out there to be in their movie. So they will pretend to go along with them or look the other way, just the same way as that, you know, every Jew acknowledges every other Jew in Hollywood that, oh yeah, he's Jewish, yeah, he has Christmas lights, don't follow him, don't worry about that, he's really a Jew. And it's the same type of thing with liberals and conservatives in Hollywood. And everyone, and even still, like when a friend of mine who's out there went to, he went to one of the Friends of Aid lunch, it was when Tim Pawlenty was speaking. And he said that, you know, everyone there, he said, well, don't tell too many people I went to this. And everyone's kind of looking over their shoulder all the time.
I didn't go to the Tim Pawlenty event. I remember when that was. It was about like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't think now at those Friends of Abe events, what you're saying generally, I agree with you. Actually, but the Friends of Abe events are now sort of like, people are not that. I mean, in the beginning there was a little more of that paranoia kind of thing, but I don't think you see it as much now.
But do you think the studio heads could actually, if they had enough balls to be able to hire someone with heads to come out and say exactly what they truly feel? Or you think they're gonna, or they think they're gonna lose the opportunity to hire the Sean Penn of the world?
You know, I don't know how to answer that exactly, because, I mean, look, what is a movie or a television show? It's the enactment of a screenplay or a teleplay. The person who wrote it has his or her own views on the world. There can be a lot of different things. Predominantly in Hollywood, there are liberals, but there are a lot of people who aren't. Look, the 2 greatest playwrights in the world are, well, David Mamet and
He made the change after that.
Even better, Tom. I think the greatest writer in the world in the English language is Tom Stoughton, who is a self-professed libertarian. So, you know, it's not all monolithic. And those guys are both won Oscars. So, I mean, on the other hand, it is kind of monolithic. It's like, you know, it's a fight. But it's a fight. If you're working in an art form where it costs $50 million to get out on the street, it should cost that. But even $20 million, you're working in an art form that's not like cheap. So the first consideration is better demo be entertaining and get people in their seats. I mean, regardless of the politics.
I was surprised and very happy at what you had to say about marriage. It's not a topic I expected to hear tonight. And I'm just wondering if there's any kind of group that's working towards marriage equality by eliminating straight marriage benefits. This is something I've personally been talking about to friends for years, that I don't understand why, if people are so blessed as to find their soulmates, they get insurance benefits, they get tax breaks, and it's like a loneliness tax on people who are alone and single. And every time I brought that up to my gay friends, my straight married friends, the implication is, well, you're just a bitter old maid, which may be true, but I'm still right. And I'm just wondering, is there any political movement to working towards marriage equality in making all marriages not the government's business, not having tax benefits, not having insurance benefits?
Well, I think the assumption part, I mean, I'm not one of them, but I'm friends with all of them, you know. I think the best place to see libertarian thought online is certainly Reason magazine.
Would you call that
Yeah,
libertarian?
and a lot of the people, I would say that they would adapt that attitude in a minute. I mean, when they're talking about marriage equality, they're talking about equality. I mean, which means, you know, it's every playing field level. Thank you. Then you know, I don't know whether that, you know, there are lots of smaller, not small issues there, like people have children, do you get a write-off? I'm not a policy guy, I'm not gonna go there. I just think that to me, it's not the government, I just don't want the government involved, private liability.
Right.
Again, doesn't that get us back to where we have really gone astray in this country? If you read the Constitution and you study the Constitution, a lot of this is a moot point. These should have been state issues only. They have no preview in the federal government. The same way, if you really want to look at the Constitution, Roe versus Wade never should have gone to the Supreme Court. It should have been kicked back to the state. It was a state issue. So, I mean, we've just gotten everything so turned around that we're not even, yes, we are a republic, but we are not following the Constitution. So we've got to decide, and this is where a lot of the debate is this a living document? If it is, then it's liberal and keep getting the judges you're getting,
Well, you
and
know,
then it's
I
gone.
actually, of course, I agree with you. But I was just at the, you know, that museum. They have this great museum there. Actually, makes you think that too. And Independence Hall, this is a museum of the Constitution. Have you been in there? I just went. I've never been there. Living in California, I miss some of this stuff. I think we're in a great moment in our history right now, because as bad as things are, when things are really bad, you know, as Rahm Emanuel told us, you know, big change. So, I mean, because this is a time when we make these things are going to be actually debated for once. And we'll the real question is, if the public going to listen? I mean, because people get bored.
How do we make America listen? How do we make America listen? How do we make some of the politicians thinking about self-defense? I know so many people who will not vote when the real vote is between a Republican and a Democrat. For a Republican, when we get Republicans who stand up and say absurd things, and I don't care if it's a person far left or far right, when you say absurd things, you're alienating people, and they allow them to represent you and say things, oh, woman can't get pregnant when she's raped because the body has a mechanism to shut things down. And you get people making moronic statements, which sounds like they need to go to a psychiatrist, and just representing the Republican Party. How do you get women and more liberal people who are interested in self-defense but can't vote for somebody who says something like that?
I mean, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, I feel the same thing a long time. I don't know, you know, that's the front, you know, when they nominated that woman to run against Harry Reid. I mean, it's you know, nothing is, look, what was the famous line by Benjamin Franklin? When he came out of the signing of the Constitution, he said, "You're a Republican if you could keep it."
That's right. That's right. That's it.
I mean, that guy was, I mean, he was ahead of the curve, as they said.
But I think this comes back to the media again, because there are far more Democrats saying far stupider things
Including our president.
that you don't hear. What Aiken said was obnoxious. It was like Bridgegate. The things that come out of Harry Reid, Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Sheila Jackson Lee, the list goes on and on. Some of the stupidest people I've ever heard.
Why would they tip over?
No, you're absolutely right. It is the media. That's why, you know, we keep plugging away at what we're doing. But the real problem for us is that we get the news out to people like you. But I don't know how we can reach the other people. It's so hard. I mean, it's really hard because the people in this room are ready to hear stuff because you're here. And you're probably thinking about it every day. But how do you reach those people who are, you know?
Yeah, I think what you were sort of saying it earlier when you said that now all of a sudden, when you first wrote your blog, you were getting recognized on the plane.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the new world, right? I mean, yes, there's Hollywood and yes, there's television, all those things, but that's where the reach is in the social media. And I think, we've seen what's happened in countries around the world. So, I mean, that's where you can reach people who...
Well, we're doing it.
Right?
The question, the thing about social media that's interesting and sad is it's very divided too. Like I have a fair number of Twitter followers, but I don't think very many liberal ones. Maybe 6. I have like 12,000 Twitter followers, but I don't know.
One more follow-up. I mean, I saw the video you did on, the one-state solution, which was brilliant. And all that does is show you, it puts forward a proposition that you really can't argue with, right? If, in fact, the Middle East were given to the Jews, then all these things would be solved because there'd be democracy everywhere. I mean, it's brilliant, and it makes you think whether you agree with it or whether you, but you think about it, and I think that's how you start to get the people who are in their worldview to maybe look a different way. That's all I'm thinking,
Well, I think part of the answer is how we have to reach out to these people. My theory is you have to make it relevant to the individual. So I'll give you a perfect example. In the Wall Street Journal last week, there was an article about regional planning in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, where this regional group, funded in part by Obama's HUD, is trying to basically take money and spend it on high-density urban development for residences, spend less money on repairing and maintaining roads for people in suburbia. Now, when you think about that, if you want to get people's attention, you would say, you may not be able to buy a house in suburbia because there may be no road, no transportation system to get you there. And all that money is being diverted because of some mandarin sitting in St. Paul or Washington saying, we're going to put in, light rail service. And that's what I think that we have to do. We have to find those issues that resonate with people, and that's how you're going to take people, not like those people here, but the regular person who's going to go home and watch, Sports Center, because now you're affecting their lives in a meaningful way, and that's how we have to approach it. Oftentimes, I think that we're too theoretical. We make it relevant. Yeah, you may win that intellectual argument, big deal. You've got to win it with the regular person.
That's right. And you're dead right. Speaking of what you were talking about, suburban things, Stanley Kurtz has written a book about it. There's a lot of the policy people in the Obama administration are deliberately trying to drain the suburbs.
Agenda 21.
They're doing it. It's absolutely purposeful.
And people would be in an uproar if they understood what was going on.
But again, as Alice just said too, I mean, Agenda 21 has been out there for a long time. You went to Agenda 21. How many people really know what it is, that it got started in the 40s? And it's really coming to fruition. And talk about your freedom of speech stuff, that all comes out of the UN and the Cairo stuff with Hillary Clinton and all the rest of that. That's where that freedom of speech stuff came in with the Islamophobia and all the rest of that.
I mean, bringing up Agenda 21, I mean that's a UN basically an idea. And all of that stuff is, there again, circles back to that whole thing about there is no investigative reporting. I mean, because how, I would bet that not a lot of people in this room have heard of Agenda 21. And you shouldn't be ashamed of yourself because